This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. We welcome now Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, who can tell us about hurricanes, but also can tell us about Russia as well. Senator, thank you so much for being with us. First of all, spend a minute on hurricanes. Hurricane Ian, which hit Florida, thankfully, from your point of view, not Louisiana, but you have some experience with hurricanes in Louisiana. What do you make of what we're seeing right now?
Yeah, it is terrible. Our hearts go out to them. The American people will come forward. I find that the American people are incredibly generous, putting aside every other division to go help our fellow American in trouble. The Cajun Navy, I'm told, is already over there helping with rescue operations. There'll be plenty of opportunity for others to contribute directly or indirectly, and we in Congress will step up. It's what we do for fellow Americans.
So Senator, from your experience, as I say, unfortunately, you have a lot of it. Is this a question of preparation? Is there anything you can prepare for something like this that comes ashore with this much fury, a Cat 4?
Absolutely. First, you evacuate, number one. And people in Florida tend to have built the hurricane code. You've got windows you can roll down to protect against, metal windows that cover your regular windows. Ideally, that is the situation. Government can do a lot by having, for example, gasoline pre-positioned gasoline trucks so that as people evacuate, the gas stations don't run out of gasoline. You can quickly fill it up, and then they can evacuate. Similarly, there's water supplies and other critical supplies that are pre-positioned close to the area of disaster so that as the people who are there, you can go in and help. Examples, and I'm sure that Governor DeSantis has done all that.
Senator, we heard from President Biden yesterday that he's going to do everything he can to help Florida. He's been talking with Governor Ron DeSantis, a member of a different party, your party, the Republican Party. There's been some contention there between the two of them, but at a time like this, partisanship goes away. At the same time, how do we judge how much aid is required? Because there's going to be aid, obviously a lot of aid required. I know back in the time of Sandy, Mr. DeSantis, when he was a congressman, actually voted against the Sandy aid. I believe you did too. How do you make sure you're doing enough and not too much?
It's important to know that the context of that no vote. There have been an original amount allocated for Sandy, but there was included within that, if I recall, it's been quite some time ago, billions of dollars for things unrelated to Sandy. Republicans in the House objected. As opposed to decreasing the total amount, they just jammed it all in to give even more money, some of which Governor Cuomo ended up using for economic development to attract companies from other states to move to New York. So first you have to be focused on the disaster and not on pork barrel projects that others would like to do. If you do that, there will be 100% of people voting for this package.
Senator, let's turn now to the situation with Russia and Ukraine. We heard from President Putin this morning about so-called annexation of parts of the Donbass. And you and others have been outspoken. We have sanctions now from the government, but you have a new proposal to deal with the issue of Russian exporting of oil. Give us what your proposal is.
Yeah, first, our proposal is to set a cap on the amount that the United States and Western countries would pay for Russian oil. It acknowledges there's been a paradox of these sanctions, in that as the international price of oil has gone up, Russia has had increased revenue from selling oil and natural gas. This attempts to do what the administration's tried to do but failed, and that is to put a cap on the amount that the West will pay, 15% above their marginal cost of production, put a cap at that level, and so therefore they're not profiting, if you will, from the fact that the sanctions are driving up the international price of oil.
As you explain, it makes good sense. What do you do about India? What do you do about China?
There's a limited amount those countries can offtake. And by the way, the Biden administration's operation is broken apart because the EU wants consensus and Hungary objects. Well, Hungary is not a major consumer of Russian oil. If everybody else accepted this paradigm, except for Hungary, China, and India, there's a limit to how much the Russians can sell. And one more thing, David, important to recognize. The Russians have limited storage space. What makes this work is that they've got to produce. And if they don't produce, their wells lock up, and and it takes billions to get them reworking. Just ask Venezuela. And so it capitalizes on the fact that the Russians have to move that oil if they want to keep production, and most of the sales are going to countries in the West. Yes, China and India do well. Hungary, who cares? But the rest of us will put a cap limiting their income.
There has been, by and large, bipartisan support for dealing with Russia over Ukraine up on Capitol Hill. Do you have bipartisan support for this, or do you expect it?
To be totally frank, my Democratic colleagues were waiting to see how the Biden administration's similar proposal was going to work out. It has not worked out. Again, they're trying to bargain with the EU as a totality, and because Hungary objects, then the EU cannot come on board. Mine takes a little bit of a unilateral approach and invites the European nations to come along. They're therefore not obligated by their EU structure. Hungary won't be a part of it. Hungary, like, how much oil do they consume? So we feel like it still works from our perspective, even if Hungary decides not to go along.
Senator, does your proposal include so-called secondary sanctions? That is to say, if there are other countries that do not comply, there will be sanctions against them?
Well, it'll be secondary sanctions upon some financial institutions if they decide to circumvent it. We cannot keep a pipeline from Russia to China from flowing oil through there. All we know is that there's a limited capacity of how much that pipeline can carry. And so that's what we're really banking on. There's a limit to how much they can offload to other countries, and therefore they have to sell to the West. Let's cap what we'll pay them.
Well, speaking of pipelines, we had quite a story coming out of the North Sea there off the shore of Denmark this week. I think last time I checked, there's something like 4 leaks. There's a lot of suspicion of possible sabotage. What do you know about that? What do you think is going on?
So what I know is what I've read. But one thing I've read is that the Russian natural gas company is required to pay a penalty if they don't deliver a certain amount of contractual amount of natural gas. This, of course, would disrupt that penalty. They would not be obligated to pay the penalty. And so there's every motivation in the world for the Russians to do this. It allows an interruption, but not to pay the cost. So as my book, they're guilty until proven otherwise.
And that really takes us back to the energy crisis, particularly centered on Europe, and particularly Germany is one of the hardest hit. We're going into the winter now. Do you think that the Europeans will hold firm in the opposition to Ukraine? Because it may cost them.
It may cost them. They're taking measures already. For example, some countries are not mothballing nuclear power. But as one German told me, if our homes are heated by natural gas which is piped in, then nuclear won't help them. We still need natural gas. That comes back to our role in the United States. We could be producing more natural gas in the United States to ship overseas. The Biden administration has done everything they could to limit leasing and permitting on federal lands. They make a public relations, we're going to do it. In reality, at one step along the way, they block it. So we need to increase production in the United States, expedite the production or the development of our LNG export facilities so that we help the Europeans get through this winter and through next year. By the way, I've called for an Operation Warp Speed, just like we did it for a vaccine, in which we took a vaccine in 10 months from nowhere to putting in someone's arm. Let's streamline our permitting so that we can begin to get our natural gas over there to help our European allies to stay warm in the winter, to keep their economy going, to stay strong against Russia.
Senator, thank you so much for being back with us. Really appreciate that. Republican Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana.